Martin Shkreli became one of the most hated CEOs in America in 2015 when he took over a pharmaceutical company and tried to raise the price of a life-saving drug by 5,000%. And then, at the close of the year, we learned that he wasn't just trying to rip off consumers, he was also ripping off wealthy investors, and that's when law enforcement agencies decided to step in. For more on this, let's go to Howard Nations. Howard, Martin Shkreli really has become, this, he's the guy you love to hate right now in America, along with, I guess, probably Donald Trump and everybody running for president on the Republican side. But Shkreli's a little bit more of an immediate threat, with what he's done with his pharmaceutical takeovers and now this whole Ponzi scheme thing that he's been running. But take us back a little bit, to the beginning. Tell us who this guy really is. Who is Martin Shkreli?
Well, Martin Shkreli is a hedge fund manager who became a pharmaceutical CEO, and he gained instant infamy when he took over Turing Pharmaceutical, which owned the rights to a 62-year-old drug that treats toxoplasmosis. This is a devastating parasitic infection that causes brain damage in babies and people with AIDS. Shkreli raised the price of the drug from $13.50 to $750 per pill. It's a $5,000% price increase. He was attacked by the media and by politicians, and he was extremely defiant in his response. He said he had a duty to make as much profit for his investors as possible, and he wished he had raised it even higher. So the response to that was, his latest adventure is he's now been arrested, charged with securities fraud and conspiracy and wire fraud conspiracy. And the federal prosecutors say now that he conned wealthy investors. He crossed over that thin line between hype and lying to lure investors into his hedge funds. And in the hedge fund business, these are regarded as sophisticated investors, so there's very little regulation. The thought is that investors in hedge funds can protect themselves. So the question becomes, why did the prosecutors go after Shkreli? And the speculation is that they're after him because his pharmaceutical activities are legal and the feds can't get him on Turing, so they're trying to find another way to stop him.
Well, what's interesting is what he did with that drug. While one of the dirtiest corporate moves we saw in 2015, it really isn't that much different from what a lot of the other pharmaceuticals do with their drugs, except they're not taking something that was cheap and making it expensive. They're just immediately releasing it, in some cases, with a 20,000% markup. Sure. Shkreli saw this and said, you know what, I'm going to get in on the action. And so that's where he really, as you said, gained this infamy, because he saw the greed taking place in the pharmaceutical industry. He's a greedy guy.
Exactly.
He wanted a piece of the action. And now, obviously they couldn't get him for that, but now he's screwing over the wealthy people. Now he's going after the 1%, and that is something that you absolutely can't do in America today, because just like Bernie Madoff, they're going to get you every time when you go after the rich people, aren't they?
Yes. The federal prosecutors are claiming that Shkreli ran a Ponzi scheme, that his two hedge funds borrowed millions from the rich investors who suffered losses. They paid back the investors with money that was earned at another pharmaceutical company, and so he also lied to them about profitability of funds. So you're right, he's tapping into the upper 1%, and that's a complete no-no. But the big hypocrisy of what you're talking about with Big Pharma, Shkreli is just a brasher, more outspoken version of both hedge fund managers and pharmaceutical CEOs. In fact, he's a microcosm. His problem is he has a big mouth and bad PR, and he made a huge mistake. He failed to buy any politicians before he did all this. The Big Pharma's trade group is complaining that Shkreli's company, Turing Investment, is just a investment vehicle masquerading as a pharmaceutical company. But we know most pharmaceutical companies are investment vehicles operated primarily to generate profits for their investors and their equity partners. But compare for a moment what Shkreli's done to what Big Pharma did in 2009 and has been doing ever since. Shkreli kicks up the price on one drug. Big Pharma in 2009 went in and bought the United States Congress. They passed an outrageous bill, and the biggest single provision of that bill was that the largest purchaser of drugs in the world, which is Medicare, cannot negotiate the price of drugs. They cannot negotiate the price of drugs because Congress says they can't. So compare the harm that's being done by Shkreli to the harm that's being done by that move by Big Pharma. Every single time a senior citizen buys drugs on Medicare, they're paying more money than they should be paying because of that big fraud that was committed in 2009 against the American public, and it continues every day. And it is millions and millions and millions of dollars every single year coming out of the pockets of senior citizens because of the success of Big Pharma in buying wholly owned politicians and in buying off the media with all their big advertising that you see every time you turn on the television. So compare that to the harm that Shkreli has done. So he's not a villain. He's reckless. He's careless. But these guys are serious criminals.
Well, and what's interesting is that a lot of writers have pointed this out, specifically Robert Reich, former Secretary of Labor under Bill Clinton. He says, Shkreli is more of a, symptom than the end result. He is come out with this big personality, but he represents everything that most corporations stand for today. It's just that he's not afraid to go out there and make a fool of himself by saying it out loud. Typically, those are the things that you only hear if you're in a shareholder meeting or if you're in those closed-door banquets where they say this to one another. They don't come out and say it to the press. Shkreli, obviously being a younger guy, doesn't quite know the rules yet. And as you pointed out, he wasn't smart enough to buy any politicians yet. So, if he doesn't end up in prison for the next, 5-10 years, give him time. He'll learn how the game is really played. Yeah. And that's the worst part is he really will. And there is a way to do it, to game the system to where there is no accountability. Shkreli just happens to be a couple years behind everybody else.
And not only should you compare him to pharmaceutical CEOs, compare him to hedge fund managers. Hedge fund managers make big gains trading on insider information. That's not illegal unless the leaker is compensated. The hedge fund managers combined with big bankers just completely bankrupted this country. They ruined our economy, and all of it was illegal. The whole thing was illegal. Compare the small thing that even if Shkreli is guilty of what he's charged with, compare that to what hedge fund managers and the big banks did to the entire country in 2008. And it extends beyond the country. The economic downfall came about as a result of the actions of big bankers and hedge fund managers. But the difference is that big banks and hedge fund managers were too big to fail. Shkreli's doing the same thing as a little bitty tiny microcosm, but he's too small to succeed. They can come after him.
Well, I think the best hope we can have, for this year, 2016, and years in the future, is that Shkreli is just going to be the first. Let's hope that he is just the first, white-collar criminal that we see marched out into the streets in a pair of handcuffs, because that image of him in that little hoodie with the handcuffs on, that needs to send shockwaves through Wall Street banks to let them know you are not above the law. We got this guy because he was a little more outspoken, but we're coming after you next. And Howard, thank you for telling us this story. We appreciate everything you do for us.
Well, just remember one more thing. He's not the first. They also caught that major criminal Martha Stewart.
Oh, yes. Yes, thank God we got her off the streets for a few years.
Sure.
Thank you very much, Howard.
Sure.